Today, I will be your co-host for this webinar, looking at the recommendations on COVID and Brexit. And to do that, I have another co-host, which is Thilo Janssen, the EWC coordinator of your federation, EFBWW. And maybe, Thilo, you can say a few words why you thought it was important and useful to organize this webinar also for the EFBWW people in the European Works Councils.
Yes, good morning, everybody. First of all, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. Also, already a big thank you to the colleagues from ETOI to make this possible in this very professional and easy to access way. Those two topics on the agenda today, Brexit and measures related to COVID-19, are very important for the industries we are working in, so the construction and the woodworking and construction material industries. The EFBWW is very active, trying to coordinate all the measures that our national union affiliates are taking on a European level. You can have a look also at the EFBWW website, where we have a dedicated page where we collect all the information on what national affiliates are doing in the different countries, which is, yes, especially for EWCs, not always easy to see in which part of the company, in which country, which laws are applicable, and what is the situation in relation to collective agreements. So, of course, you can always talk to your colleagues, but you can also go to our website and have a look there for a good overview. We do also post the materials that we are working on European level. In this case, the two recommendations that we have been creating together with the colleagues from all the different sectoral unions, which I think is also a very important signal that we that not everybody works separated, but that we join forces and do this together. We have tried to keep the recommendations very practical and very short, so that they are really useful in your in your work as European Works Councils. Yes, I don't want to be long anymore. I think Bruno has prepared a very good presentation on both topics, and yes, we will have a very good chance today to discuss it, to take into your account also your experiences, which is the most important part. And anyway, the most important part here, I think, is that we exchange among each other, that you have the possibility to exchange. And yes, I wish us all a very good webinar today.
And now we're online. Yes, there we are. All right, what are we going to do today in these 2 hours? The first hour will be dedicated to the Brexit situation and the impact on European Works Councils. I will start with giving you a little bit of background. How did we get into the mess where we are today with Brexit, and looking at obviously those recommendations that were jointly published by the European federations, actually an update of recommendations that were already published 2 years ago, but we have to update regularly because the situation changes also very often. We will take some comments, obviously, also from an EFBWW perspective, where Thilo can say what's happening in the different companies as we speak. And we also will have, hopefully on time, Jonathan Hayward, colleague from Unite the Union, who is his daily business is coordinating European Works Councils, also always running from one place to the other. Even now during the webinar during this day of the webinar, he's in different calls, different meetings at the same time. So he promised he would join us by 10:15, 10:30 latest, to also give us an update from the UK perspective, actually, on what's happening with this Brexit and how he is handling with the EWC colleagues of his union. And there will be some time after that to allow you to ask further questions, or maybe come with your personal experiences around Brexit. The second part of the webinar, again, about an hour planning for that, on COVID-19, the pandemic situation and the impact on the EWCs. I'll start again with giving you a little bit of background, some little historical overview of the last few months, from the start of this pandemic to where we are today, and again, the list of recommendations as published by the European federations and applying to all of your European Works Councils. And then we will also take, again, some comments from Thilo from the EFBWW perspective, looking at the sector situation specifically, which obviously is a bit different whether you're working in commerce or in metal production or in construction, in your case. And then we'll also take some examples from practice. I hope that the colleagues who are supposed to speak are indeed already logged in. We should have some experience from Lafarge-Holcim and from Budzi Unicem, two bigger European Works Councils in your sectors. And then again, obviously also time for you to add further questions that you might have. So that's the plan for the next 2 hours. So let's dig into the first topic, which is Brexit. We've been talking about it for quite a long time already. You may remember that it started already in 2016 with a referendum in the UK, whether or not the British people wanted to stay within the European Union or rather leave, with, as a quite surprising turnout, a 52% majority to say we're going out of the European Union. Quite to the surprise, not in the least, of the British government actually at that time. And you may remember that that was also who then in March 2017 officially informed the European Council that actually indeed the UK will be leaving the European Union. And that triggered the so-called Article 50, which is a part of the European Treaty, so how the European Union works. And that means actually there is a 2-year period that starts before the UK is actually not a member of the European Union anymore, 2-year period during which an agreement can be negotiated on what the future relation will look like. So latest by the 29th of March 2019, the UK would not be a member of the European Union anymore. Some 3 months later, both sides had composed their negotiating team and actual negotiations can start. More or less a year and a half later, that led to an agreement, a withdrawal agreement, which was supported by all of the European Union member states, with one exception, the UK. There was a discussion in the House of Commons where the withdrawal agreement was considered as insufficient and rejected, which led to new negotiations, more political turmoil. You will remember probably also several sessions of voting, which again and again led to a refusal to accept the agreement that was on the table. Eventually, April 2019, the UK government had to ask the European Union to extend the period for negotiating the new relationship, and that extension was given until October 2019. But further political changes, we had again a new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who then in July 2019 became Prime Minister, leading a new team of negotiators. October 2019, a new withdrawal agreement, a revised withdrawal agreement was reached, quite surprisingly because the time was much shorter, but with a few tweaks here and there, they were able to find a new agreement, which then was approved by the House of Commons in October 2019, but again with a lot of discussions still, some details that still needed to be developed in more detail, and a further extension was needed to arrange all this, which was eventually agreed as to the 31st of January 2020. And then 24th of January 2020, all details were discussed and the withdrawal agreement was formally signed, leading to, on the 31st of January 2020 this year, at 11 p.m. exactly, the UK leaves the European Union. They are no longer now a member state of the European Union, but we are still in a transition period because still some of the elements of the agreement need to be worked out in much more detail. And that period runs until the 31st of December 2020. Unless there is another extension, still a possibility. Anything is still possible in the Brexit story. Unless there is an extension or unless there is a no-deal thing, there will be, on the 1st of January 2021, a totally new situation for the Brexit colleagues completely outside of the European Union. What does this mean for European Works Councils, this whole saga? Well, we're directly impacted, of course, but the level of impact can be different depending on the particular situation of your company, of your European Works Council or SE Works Council. The worst situation, the top level, the red bar in this table, are those companies that will drop below the threshold of 1,000 employees in Europe and 2 times 150 in 2 different countries, 2 different member states, because that means those companies actually are not within the rules anymore to have a European Works Council. There is a risk that these EWCs will simply be cancelled. And we estimate, we looked at our database, the information that we have available at the ETUI, and we estimate roughly about 4% of the existing EWCs, of 1,160 that we have today, might actually be at risk of existence even. So the only possibility there would be to continue on a purely voluntary basis. On a voluntary basis, you can always still have some agreements similar to an EWC, but the situation will be that it's no longer covered by the EU legislation in that case. But only 4%, so just a small percentage at high risk there. More important still is the second level, the orange bar, with EWCs that have their headquarters, the reference law, in the UK, but with no risk of cancelling the EWC because there's enough employees in other countries outside of the UK. So the big thing there to do is to find new reference law, and obviously also the risk that in the future the UK colleagues will not be welcome anymore to be members of the EWC. We know, again, from our database that about 15% of all existing European Works Councils have their headquarters reference law in the UK, and therefore will have to find a new solution, a new reference law. And that's one of the recommendations that we will come back on in one of the next slides, actually, on how to do this, what would be the best solution. But definitely look for a proper solution with regard to the reference law, and at the same time try to keep the UK colleagues on board. The third category at risk is the yellow bar, where the headquarters, the reference law, is not the UK, and there's no risk of cancelling the EWC, but the problem there, obviously, is that the UK reps might not be welcome anymore. You might lose the UK colleagues in your European Works Council, and that is 70% of the total of all European Works Councils. So that is really a big number. That's more than 700 European Works Councils that need to look into the possibility of keeping the EWC with the UK colleagues on board. And then finally, the fourth category, you might say, close to 30% probably of all EWCs don't really have a problem at this point, because the reference law is not the UK and they don't have any branches in the UK, no representatives from the UK. Well, still there, probably it would be wise to look for the future, for future reference, that the scope of the EWC also includes the UK, in the same way as many European Works Councils today also have members from Switzerland, for instance, which is also entirely out of the scope of the European legislation, but still lots of Swiss colleagues are sitting on European Works Council. So a similar solution should be found also for future reference if the company extends, buys a company in the UK, that in that case UK colleagues could be still included within the European Works Council. So with all these different possibilities, risks, and possible solutions, it was clear that it would be good to have clear guidelines from the European federations that are supporting the EWCs. And that's exactly what the European federations have done. There are 5 guidelines to help you with dealing with the Brexit situation in your European Works Councils. First recommendation is nothing changes. Nothing changes until at least the 31st of December 2020, which, as I explained you just a moment ago, is the ultimate date when an agreement should be reached, arranging all aspects of the future trade situation, mainly between the EU and the UK. So until then, all EWC colleagues from the UK can still stay on board. There's no reason why they should be expelled or not allowed to assist in the meetings anymore. The legislation of the European Union still applies until 31st of December 2020. So there's no change with regard to the position of the UK colleagues so far. The same rights and duties apply. They are still allowed to discuss the EWC matters with their colleagues in the UK. They're still allowed to participate in training, participate in the meetings, and so on. I will have to be really watchful that this is respected indeed in practice as well. Even actually at this point during this year, when there would be a possibility of setting up a new European Works Council based on UK law with headquarters in the UK, you can still launch that request and set up a special negotiating body, already start negotiating, knowing that most likely in the end you will have to look for a different reference law. So that's recommendation 1. Nothing changes. Recommendation 2, for the future, obviously, for 70% of the EWCs, as we just saw, it will be necessary to take an active role in securing the rights of your UK colleagues. It is a principle supported by all European federations that in the future, the UK workers should be represented also in the European Works Council or SE Works Council, or even in SEs, you have a possibility of board level representation. Also there, it might be necessary to look for ways of ensuring that UK colleagues are represented properly. It'll have to be done in a case-by-case approach because the situation is different for every EWC, depends on how many people, in what situation they are represented, and so on. So it'll be very important to have a good look at your agreement. What does it say? Maybe the scope is already larger than the European Union. If already your EWC has, again, people from Switzerland, for instance, you have a good argument to say, well, let's just extend that and include the UK as well. It might be more difficult if it's very restrictive, if it's really only EU countries. And then you might actually indeed have to review your agreement, define the scope of change needed. Don't think only about making sure that the UK will stay represented. You also will have to probably negotiate conditions for UK colleagues to be elected, appointed to the EWC, because there will be no reference law anymore in the UK on how this is done, or specific protection rules for those representatives on EWCs, because again, they cannot fall back on local rules anymore at the end of this year. Third recommendation refers to those European Works Councils that have the UK as reference law, because then obviously you'll have to look for a new reference. This is actually a management prerogative. The management can freely decide what it will be, but it's really important that we get involved in this, that we try to get at least our voice heard, and that a solution is found which is not simply going to another low standard country. We hear from many EWCs that they are simply moving from the UK to Irish law, which is very similar and maybe not the best reference to go to. There are other possibilities. There is a very neutral rule provided in the EU directive on EWCs, which says that if there's no EU headquarters, then you go to the country that has the highest number of employees. So that could be a neutral reference that we can defend in our discussions with the management. But we have to be proactive about that. We will have to request this discussion, because otherwise management will simply take the decision and we'll have to just follow that order from the management in that way. One argument that can be used, but probably Jonathan Hayward, when he has logged in, will be able to comment a bit on that. There is a very confusing decision from the UK government that says that in case of a no deal, they might still have to continue with a UK-based EWC, whereas on basis of EU law, you will also have an EU law-based EWC. So you might have a situation, very bizarre, of having two European Works Councils within one and the same company, one with only British representatives and one without the British representatives. Very confusing situation, but probably, hopefully, Jonathan can shed a light on that. Fourth recommendation, it's not just about keeping the UK colleagues on board and making sure you have a new reference law. It's also about the impact on the activities of your company. So there, it's really necessary also to make sure that on the agenda of your plenary meeting, you have a discussion on what will happen. What about the financial situation of your company? What about plans to relocate activities outside of the UK or maybe towards the UK? Will this lead to problems with sales, with production sites, and so on? So there's a lot to discuss there that is worth putting on the agenda of the European Works Council. And this is transnational, so there's no issue there whether or not you can discuss it. Certainly to be included in your next meeting if you haven't done so already. And then finally, for that 4-5% of EWCs that are at risk of disappearing entirely, it is good to check the thresholds of 1,000 employees in the European Union Economic Area, and 150 in 2 different member states without the UK numbers of workers included, to check whether or not you're still within the scope of continuing with your EWC without any worry, or if there is a risk that you might indeed face cancelling your EWC as a whole. If that is so, if you see that you don't meet the thresholds anymore, certainly make contact with your European Federation to see how this can be dealt with, how it would be possible to move ahead anyway, or at least set up some other structure that you can stay in contact with your colleagues from different countries. So those are the 5 main recommendations coming from the European Federations, covering all sectors. But maybe now, Thilo, you can add from the specific perspective of the building and woodworkers, if there's anything to add or what the experiences are so far. Do you have any EWCs that you know already are at risk of disappearing? What's the situation for your sector?
Thank you very much, Bruno. Well, yes, we in our different sectors, we have many companies, many multinational companies who have operations also in the UK. Some of them, some of the EWCs, and I see some of the colleagues around here in the participants list have already worked on this and have already found an agreement to further include UK members. I see colleagues from Lafarge-Holcim, I see colleagues from ETEX. Others are still in the process of negotiating. I've also seen our coordinator and also a member from CRH. And yes, it would be very interesting also in the discussion to hear from your side how things are ongoing. In general, I would say the most important message or one of the most important messages, but this is also the first one, is, well, time is still running and there's still time to be active and to work on this. And yes, this was also the main reason why we, as European Trade Union Federation officers, have updated the Brexit recommendations. We had them already. They were written in 2018, but now Brexit has happened formally. But at the same time, there's still time to act because we have this transition period which might be extended even. And also to be aware that the danger of a no-deal Brexit is not off the table. So it's very important also to be active and not just wait. But yes, I don't want to take too much of the time because I think we have a very good expert now with us, with Jonathan Hayward, and also the colleagues from the ground, from the companies, which can share their actual experience. So yes, so far from me.
Thank you. Indeed, Jonathan, I'm happy to see that you are indeed logged in. You are our true expert on anything from the UK in general and specifically on Brexit. Help us out, Jonathan. What's happening? Will there be a deal? Will there be no deal? What's happening in the EWCs that you are coordinating? What do the British EWC members actually expect also? What can we foresee in the next few months ahead? Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thanks, Bruno. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, fine. Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks for the invite. Unfortunately, there's something wrong with my camera, so I've not turned it on because it's kind of flashing, so it could disturb people. But yeah, I mean, we can only work on what we know, Bruno, and at the moment, with regards to the UK government and the COVID crisis, we don't know very much. What we do know is that it's certainly looking more likely that there could be no deal. You know, the negotiations don't seem to be very fruitful. There doesn't seem to be a willingness for the UK government to be flexible. I think the European Commission is starting to harden its stance. So we're working basically on a no deal scenario for European Works Councils. Now, obviously, this is a problem for UK representatives. I saw some of your presentation, Bruno, and obviously you outlined the companies that will be or will not be covered by the directive, or what companies will, or what, how many, the percentage of UK EWC reps who will no longer be covered post Brexit. But you did allude to one point which I think is very, very important, is the confusing situation with the recommendation of the UK government in the event of a no deal scenario. And this puts us in quite a strong position with regards to negotiating continued UK representation on European Works Councils, but also the opportunity to negotiate where they may domicile an agreement in the event that UK no longer is part of the or covered, and they have to move it to another member state. Now, we're only talking here about agreements that are currently under UK law. Yeah, you outlined in your presentation that there's different scenarios for different situations, and this only applies, this piece of information I'm going to give you now only applies to UK domiciled EWCs currently. Yeah, because the European Commission has indicated or advised that on the day of withdrawal of the UK, European companies will have to nominate an alternative member state in which to domicile their European Works Council agreement. Failure to do so, as you pointed out, would result in the country with the highest number of employees being the automatic choice of where they have to domicile it. So we expect and we predict that most companies are not going to allow themselves to be caught in that situation, and they are going to predetermine where they want to domicile their agreement. And as you rightly point out, I mean, 95% of the companies I'm dealing with have chosen Ireland. Yeah. And we have all the complications of the Irish law, mainly due to the fact that we don't believe it's been transposed properly into the law, and also the complications of trying to enforce agreements under the law, which is pretty immature. There's not been many cases. In fact, I think there's only been one, or there's not, certainly not been that many. So we're uncertain about what that will mean for EWC. So it's not the ideal location in which we would advise European Works Councils to domicile their agreements. So we get to the situation what the UK, the European Commission has said, you have to domicile it somewhere else on the day of withdrawal. But also, interestingly, the UK government has given out advice to say, where you have an agreement under UK law on the date of withdrawal, that company will be required to continue to apply UK legislation to that European Works Council. And so in that event, what it suggests is that a company that has a UK-based European Works Council now will have to move their agreement to another member state, but they will also have to keep their existing European Works Council under UK legislation, and therefore they will then contain UK representation within the UK-based applied European Works Councils. And as you alluded to, that would mean in practice you would have two European Works Councils, one that would be under UK law that would continue to include UK representation, and under the definition of transnationality would continue to apply to the UK as well within that. And you would have to have a second European Works Council which would be domiciled in another member state, which would not have UK representation and would not include the UK for transnationality purposes. Now, there's not going to be many companies, I suspect, that are going to be happy with this situation. So what we're advising now representatives to do is to say to a company, look, you have a UK-based agreement. Do you know what the current advice is? Explain the current advice, which is two European Works Councils. But you could say to them, look, we can help you out here. Yeah, if you agree to include UK representatives in an agreement post Brexit, and you agree, or we agree on the location of your future European Works Council, we will allow you to move your European Works Council now, yeah, on that basis, so you won't have an agreement under UK law at the point of withdrawal, and therefore you won't have to run 2 European Works Councils. You only have to run 1, which will be in a new member state, but it will include UK representation, and that would solve all your problems in the eventuality of having 2 European Works Councils. Now that's proving quite fruitful, because companies don't want 2 European Works Councils. They don't want the confusion, they want certainty. And so providing that certainty now is something that we are getting traction from companies. So I don't know whether you want me to stop there, Bruno, on that kind of confusing note, just in case anybody's got any questions. But that's the position we currently are with regards to the UK. Obviously, we're working with other unions and European Works Councils that are not domiciled in the UK to ask them and request that the UK can continue to be part of the European Works Councils. We're getting a mixed reaction. Some companies are happy for the UK to continue to participate. One thing we are starting to see is that companies are saying, yes, we'll allow the UK to be represented, but we won't include them in the definition of transnationality. So it's a but that, you know, then you say, well, what's the point in the UK being part of the body if we can't discuss things that are happening in the UK? Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a mixed bag out there, but it's still a very confusing situation.
Mm-hmm. It's good that you point a finger at that particular aspect there at the end also. It's not just about keeping UK representatives on board, it's also making sure that you can still discuss matters that have an impact on the UK workers, because you might have indeed an EWC with some guests from other countries outside the European Union, but who are there indeed only as observers, and then, you know, that's not the situation we want to get into. Thank you for that. I imagine that it might still be rather confusing for a lot of people what this situation actually really looks like with this double legislation possibility in the future. I'm looking at the chat feed. Cyprian, I don't know if you picked up on any questions or remarks yet. If anybody wants to take the floor, express their opinion, or has simply a question they want to ask, please put it in the chat zone. Just quickly checking that.
There hasn't been any questions yet, so feel free to ask questions in the chat that you are having, and I will deliver it to Bruno or to Jonathan or to Thilo, but no questions yet.
Yeah, Tony, I wrote my name just so. Okay, can I ask a question? This is perhaps not a question, and I would like to excuse myself for my bad English, because I haven't been able to speak English for a couple of months now, sitting in my home for 7 weeks. But all right, when it comes to the Swedish companies, I would like to say I think most of them are willing to rewrite the agreements to keep UK inside the councils. I don't think we will have a big issue with that. But I have one. I don't know if this is a question or whatever it is. When we say, like, we have one representative in the room right now from Gelben, Adrian Manning, who is with us here today. His company is under UK legislation, and we need to do something about that. And if we have a recommendation where you would like to put, let's say, the company under the country where you have the largest workforce, in a lot of our Swedish companies, you will end up in the Baltic states or Poland, because wood production is quite big in those countries. And without any disrespect for our Polish friends or Baltic friends, I like them a lot, and I've spent a lot of time there. So this is nothing personal, but I don't like the idea of putting anything under those legislations, especially in Poland right now, where the court system is under review. And to be quite honest, both Poland and Hungary should be, well, there should be some action taken by the EU towards those countries because of legislation and also human rights and other things. So what's your take on that when we end up in the situation where you will put companies under those kind of legislation, because I think we will have companies that will look to those countries and say, this is not bad. We have our biggest workforce in Poland, so let us put them over there. And also beside the fact that the court system is not that great, the Polish unions, according to me at least, don't have the financial or the staff that is requested to run big councils. So that's a problem for me, and perhaps not a question, but it's a thought.
Thank you for that. I think my Polish colleague Cyprian, who is our chat master today, might even agree with you on some of the aspects. Thank you for that. I see that probably Alexander Hovarts also wanted to take the floor. People just post their name in the chat bar. Alexander?
Mic on? Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I was just turning my microphone on. I'd like to make some comments regarding two EWC coordinate. One is for the EFBWW, one is CRH, Irish Construction Materials Company, big multinational company operating in 13 or 14 European countries. So there we have a very bad agreement that has been ruling the EWC for the last 20 years. We are trying to improve this agreement. We are in the middle of some kind of negotiation that would have to that were meant to start at the end of March in Dublin, but then the whole COVID-19 crisis began, and so it is postponed, and we are still waiting for a new date. Of course, we don't want any video conference as was recommended by the ETUFs when it comes to negotiation meeting. So what we have there, so for CRH, and I'm really glad that 3 members of the EWCs and 2 members of the select committee are attending this webinar, so maybe they can complement what I will explain now. So CRH, we do have a representative from UK, but we have another issue is that as far as we know, is not a union member. So we do have a representative which is not who is not a union member. That's one point. The other one, what we are trying to negotiate in the new agreement. So we are already trying to put some possibility for management to accept UK representatives even after Brexit, so as active members, but without voting rights. So that's what we will propose. So far for CRH. So please, the other CRH EWC member, please feel free to comment or to add or to correct anything. Then the second company is a Belgian construction company, Bessix, active in the Middle East. Half of the turnover in the Middle East and half in Europe, more or less. There we have another case. So the first one is related to what you were showing in your slide, Bruno, the 4 scenarios when it comes to UK representative in the EWC. So this one is like the green bar, the 4th one, but with a slight difference, which is that we in the EWC we do have 3 branches in the UK, but no members so far. So they were acquired 3 years ago in 2017, but we don't have any UK representatives so far. So what we are trying to do there is to keep the door open, saying, okay, we do not have any representative so far, but we really want to keep the geographical scope of the agreement open so that in the future, if we manage to find some EWC members from the UK, they will still be allowed to to represent the UK workers there. So that's my point of view. And I would like maybe if we have time to add a question about the possibility to widen the geographical scope. So that's part of the directive and transposition law. Maybe if other colleagues can share their experience about that, because so far I've been trying to discuss with management at basics level, so the Belgian construction company, and they just say, no way, that's not possible, we don't even want to discuss it, and forget it. So I would like to hear some other experiences and your expertise, Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I think I will mainly give the floor back to Jonathan to comment on all that before. But before that, first give the floor to another colleague who would asked to express their experience or ask a question. Andrew Cottrell from Lafarge Holcim. Andrew, please take the floor.
Yes, good morning, everyone. As you say, I'm Andy Cottrell. I'm a European Council member for Lafarge Holcim. I'm one of the 4 UK members, and I'm also a union representative. In 2016, we saw the merger of Lafarge and so we had the merger of the two councils. And what we did at that point in time, in the scope, we agreed that the scope would include members of the European Commission, the European EWC members, EEA members, and it would also include any former members of the European Council. And so the UK would be involved after we leave the European Union. We also had Swiss members join at the time, which also, as you said earlier on, gives us a good argument to be representative. And also, if any other country in the future decides to leave the European Union, which looked quite possible in 2016, they would also be able to retain membership within the Lafarge Holcim EWC.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Jonathan, some responses still from your side. I heard solutions, very creative solutions of keeping the UK colleagues on board, but maybe without voting rights, or finding other solutions. The question also from one of the colleagues was, what if the reference law of the country with the biggest number of employees is actually also low standard? What other arguments would we have then? What do you think about this? What is your response to the 3 colleagues that we've heard now?
Yeah, thanks, Bruno. I mean, the first point, which was Tony about the situation about the biggest country, if it's going to be very weak law. I mean, this is a problem. I mean, ideally, the best way of dealing with this would be that you agree with a company what law to go to. Yeah, but if you can't, then we say default to the country with the largest number of employees. However, if that's problematic, what I have done in a number of EWCs where we can't agree on the law, or the largest number, for example, it flips the other way. Sometimes companies, when they see that their largest number is going to be in France, for example, they get very nervous about wanting to domicile their agreement in France, and they say, look, if we default to the largest number of employees, then we're going to have to get French law, and we're not happy with that. So what I have done in a number of cases is reached a compromise that says it will be domiciled in one of the top 3 countries with the highest number of employees. So that gives everybody a bit of flexibility in saying, you know, if you've got Poland, Belgium and France, then, you know, Belgium to compromise. So there are nuances which you can introduce which allow you to have a more fairer approach to which is the domiciled future European Works Council law. Alexandra, you know, yeah, I mean, we're coming across this quite a bit, where there is hybrid representational rights for UK representatives, sometimes as observers with no voting rights, sometimes, you know, as I said earlier on, part of the EWC, but the transnationality doesn't include the UK. So anything we can maintain as much rights as possible and to include them as full members as possible. It just doesn't just benefit the UK, it also benefits other members because it widens the scope of your European Works Council and the opportunity to be informed and consulted. With regards to, I think it's Besic, you said, the company you deal with, but there's no UK representatives. I'm happy to look at that. There could be UK representatives. We know that UK management are often not the most proactive when it comes to European Works Council. They may not have actively sought somebody to be on the European Works Council. If you want to drop me a line on where they operate, I can check our system to make sure, or to see whether we do have members there and help you out on that one. Andrew, good to hear a nice Unite the Union member is on the call and as a representative of Lafarge. I mean, I think that's the ideal kind of clause we want in these European Works Council agreements, which, you know, provides continued representation and broadens out the representational scope to include as many European Works Councils as possible. The problem for UK-based agreements is that UK companies don't particularly like European Works Councils. Yeah, it's not in our DNA nature, in our industrial relation systems, and most other companies that are domiciled under UK law currently are either American or Japanese companies, and they too don't like European Works Councils, and it's not in their DNA, this you know, information and consultation. So they want to reduce the scope and reduce their exposure to European Works Councils, not include them, and that's often the situation. And just, you know, on that note, back to Tony's point where he said, you know, where companies are going to go, are they going to go to Poland and all the other possibly Baltic? UK management, American management are getting advised by UK solicitors, and all of them are telling them to go to Ireland. Yeah. Irish law, because as I mentioned earlier on, the uncertainty of it, but also it's English speaking. They understand the law, they can read it, they can go to a court where they understand what the judge is saying. So it's that culture that the UK has a close cultural relationship with Ireland, and that also plays a significant part in their choice to move to Ireland. And yeah, I noticed Dennis Sheridan from Tip 2's on the call, and I know he's been working on stuff as well. We are going to have a significant amount of issues that we're going to have to deal with post-Brexit in the Irish you know, atmosphere of industrial relations and courts. And at the moment, it doesn't look particularly helpful for trade unions and European Works Councils.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, maybe one extra question there. It's a bit of a detail maybe in a way, but still quite important. As I mentioned in the introduction also, one of the aspects that might have to be included in a reviewed agreement is the way how British representatives will be elected, appointed in the future. Today, if my memory serves me right, if there is a sort of representation body, a consultative committee or something in a company, that's the body that decides, or otherwise it's a general ballot. Do you have any specific recommendation on how, for the future, in the agreements to keep the UK colleagues on board, this should be arranged?
I mean, the UK government, as I mentioned, with regards to the continued application of the TISA regulations, which are they've said they will maintain in place. So in that case, in that scenario, you would still have a system in place, which is, as you said, the elective of the whole workforce via a ballot, unless you've got a consultative committee in place. Unless the European Works Council itself, I mean, this is the big difference for the UK. While in many countries, it is a national legislation that determines how a European Works Council representative is elected or selected. In the UK, it's only a ballot of the full workforce if you specifically say it's back to national legislation. If you put in your agreement that UK can be nominated by trade unions, that supersedes the requirement to have a national ballot. So I would recommend to anybody who's renegotiating these agreements that if you can put in there that the UK representatives will be nominated by trade unions, that solves a massive problem for us.
I think that would solve the problem for many countries, not just for the UK, if we would have that rule set in place. I think for this group of trade union people, this is really what we would like to have. Last chance, we're close to getting to 11 o'clock, and I know, Jonathan, you're very busy, so probably also can't hang on for too long anymore. But there was one last request for the floor, I notice, Adrian Manning, and then we'll close the part on Brexit and move on to the COVID-19 situation. Adrian, you can take the floor if you like. Just switch on your microphone and speak. You have to make sure you unmute your microphone.
Yeah, I've got my microphone on. It's on now.
There you are.
Good morning. Adrian Manning here from the EWC from Geraldville. We've made a new agreement last year, which we put into the agreement that all our English or British subjects may still take part in voting and having a say in how the EWC is run. But what I would like to know is the law of the land for the EWC is still in the UK. Does it have to be changed by law, or can it stay in England? But I'm trying to get it into Germany because we've got the most workforce in Germany at the moment. Can anybody give me an answer on that one?
Jonathan, I'm sure.
Yeah, Adrian, yeah. I mean, if you look at, like I say, the European Commission has said the UK will no longer be covered by the directive in the event of a no deal, and they are instructing companies to move it somewhere else. So you will have to move, according to the European Commission, somewhere else. I also mentioned, but you will also have, if you go by the UK government's recommendations, be able to continue to apply your current agreement in the UK as well. So you're in the situation that I mentioned earlier on, where you're able to negotiate possibly a good deal, because you can go to the company and say, if you're willing to move the agreement to Germany and you continue to apply it to the UK representatives, we are happy now to amend the agreement. Now you can amend the agreement. So you just change the agreement is to move it to Germany now. So you are not required then to have two European Works Councils at the point of withdrawal. So you're actually in one of the stronger positions by going to the company and proactively and telling them, you're going to have a problem. I can help you solve your problem. And look, I'm happy to, Adrian, if you want to drop me an email, I'm happy to talk you through that or give you any guidance on that and advice.
Adrian, that's a satisfactory answer, I guess.
Can I carry on, or?
Yeah.
No? Yeah, I'm working with Tony Bregan at the moment from Sweden, which is quite good. Tony's quite good in his knowledge and everything else. But Jonathan, I'd like to get back to you as well. That'd be good to get a bit more information on things that how it runs in the UK. I know I'm English, but I've not lived in the UK for the last 30 years. So I'm a bit out of touch there. Okay? Thanks very much.
No worries. No worries.
I'll put you in a separate chat room now. Thank you very much. I think it would be important for any EWC, one, to analyze very well what is the actual situation, in what level of risk are you, what needs to be done. Discuss the situation with your EWC coordinator, if you have one, a representative from EFBWW, but possibly also with a trade union officer just like Jonathan Hayward from the UK, because they obviously have a different view, more information possibly than your coordinator, who might be from Germany or Sweden or whatever. And in general, and that's where I for the conclusions on this part of the webinar, might want to give the floor back to Thilo. In general, obviously, also the point of call is Thilo himself at the EFBWW, who definitely will want to know what is happening and also can coordinate, can forward you to other colleagues who have the relevant knowledge that can help you. And maybe, Thilo, that is another question maybe directly to you. Maybe you also have some standard articles that you can suggest to the colleagues to include into their agreements.
Well, I think the main points have been made here during the presentation, and I'm also very happy that that our webinar is coming to concrete results in enabling people to network, and having an expert like Jonathan joining us and also willing to directly help some EWCs, and that's the most important part. We have some of our coordinators who joined the meeting today, and my role at the EFBWW is, of course, collecting information, providing them, share that information, and I'm always available to do that. So Also to all the EWCs and members, normally those who are here today are in very good contact with their coordinators. But in any case, you can always contact the EFBWW, and we will always look for a solution, direct you to the right person to answer the question if we don't have the expertise ourselves. So that is our role. So always very welcome, and we are always there to help networking and find the right people.
Thank you. The story definitely is not finished yet. We are in a process that might still lead to different results in the end. There might be a no-deal Brexit, there might be a deal, they might in some way still apply European legislation. We are still in a situation where everything is possible, with the only certainty that they are no longer a member state of the European Union. That is definitely a final decision. So thank you for that debate. If you have, I can imagine that you still have a lot of questions and will be confronted with other situations where you might not know exactly what to do. As Till already said, everything can be sent directly to him or through your coordinator, or if something's popping up still in the next hour, put it in the chat line. I'm sure that my chat master, Cyprian, will take good note of that and make sure that you get answers also after the webinar. But now it's time to move on to the second chapter of